They first thought it was a stranger looking for food, but when it returned the next day and the day after that, the family realized this visitor was teaching them something far greater than fear. The morning was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The mist hung low over the cabin roof, curling around the pine trees that surrounded the small clearing like protective arms. For the Miller family, mornings were usually bustling: laughter over breakfast, the smell of frying eggs, the occasional bickering between Lucy, the youngest at 9, and her older brother, Ben. But this morning even the wind seemed hesitant, as if it were holding its breath. Sitting by the window, Mrs. Miller sipped her coffee, staring out at the dewy grass. She had noticed the unusual silence immediately. It wasn't the wind, it was something else. Something watching. Then she saw it. A bear, not large but noticeable enough to make her heart skip a beat, stood at the edge of the porch. It wasn't approaching aggressively, nor was it scavenging for food. It simply stood, its head slightly tilted, its dark eyes fixed on the cabin as if it were measuring the space, weighing whether it belonged here. "Mom, there's a bear outside." Lucy squealed from behind, her voice high-pitched, shaking with excitement and fear. Mrs. Miller's grip on the coffee mug tightened. "Stay calm, Lucy. Everyone just stay inside." Ben joined them at the window, his eyes wide. "It's not coming in, is it?" he whispered. His voice had the nervous tremor of someone unsure whether to be terrified or fascinated. The bear remained still. Its presence was quiet, deliberate. It sniffed the air, its black nose twitching. Then, with a slow and almost ceremonious turn, it moved a few steps closer to the porch as though testing a boundary. Mr. Miller, who had been stacking firewood outside moments earlier, froze mid-motion. "Back inside, everyone," he called. He kept his voice low, steady. He didn't want to startle it. Slowly he retreated inside, making sure the screen door clicked securely behind him. For several minutes the family watched in silence. The bear didn't growl, didn't attempt to enter. It simply remained, patient, like an uninvited yet strangely respectful guest. Lucy pressed her forehead to the glass. "Why isn't it leaving?" she asked quietly, almost to herself. "That's what we need to figure out," Mr. Miller replied. He didn't sound afraid. He sounded curious, wary, and deeply aware that this encounter was unusual. Most bears avoided human habitation entirely unless driven by hunger or aggression. But this bear, something about its posture, the way it lingered, felt different. The first lesson came subtly. Mrs. Miller noticed the bear occasionally glance at the discarded items near the porch, old shoes, a pile of firewood, but it never touched anything. It respected the human space. In that quiet observation, a sense of mutual understanding began forming, though neither species could articulate it. Hours passed. The bear eventually wandered to the edge of the clearing, where the pines thickened, but never out of sight of the cabin. The Millers went about their routines cautiously, always aware of the quiet presence nearby. The children's curiosity battled their caution, with Lucy stealing glances through the window and Ben sketching the bear in his notebook. "Do you think it's hungry?" Lucy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Miller shook his head. "I don't think so. It seems deliberate, like it's observing, not foraging. Maybe it's just curious, or maybe it's lost." The afternoon sun dipped lower, painting golden streaks across the clearing. The bear finally retreated fully into the tree line, disappearing among the shadows of the forest. The family exhaled collectively, a mix of relief and lingering tension. Dinner that evening was subdued. The usual chatter was replaced by thoughtful silence. Lucy kept glancing at the window, half expecting the bear to return at any moment. Mr. Miller finally broke the silence. "Today we learned something without even realizing it," he said. "That bear, by simply being here, is teaching us patience, awareness, respect." "What do you mean?" Ben asked. "Well," Mr. Miller continued, "it didn't touch anything. It didn't threaten us. It respected our space. And by watching it we had to respect its space too. Sometimes observing carefully and understanding boundaries is more important than acting immediately." Lucy frowned slightly. "So, it's like a lesson?" "Exactly," Mrs. Miller said softly, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Nature teaches lessons, often in ways we don't expect. Today the lesson is awareness." The children nodded, still processing the encounter. The bear had come and gone, yet it lingered in their minds far longer. There was something humbling about that, a reminder that humans were not the only ones navigating rules and boundaries, even if those rules were unwritten. Night fell and the forest grew quiet again. The Millers went to bed, hearts still fluttering from the day's strange event. But the quiet wouldn't last long. Outside, hidden among the pines, a pair of dark eyes watched the cabin, unwavering, patient, and perhaps already planning its next visit. The first encounter had ended, but the story was far from over. Something about the bear's presence had shifted the family's perspective. They didn't know yet how often it would return, or what lessons it would continue to teach. If you encountered a bear outside your home, would you approach it, observe it, or leave it alone? What would you hope to learn? The morning sun filtered weakly through the thick canopy, casting mottled shadows across the cabin's porch. The Millers had barely spoken about the previous day's visitor, but an unspoken tension hung in the air. Breakfast was quieter than usual, each clink of cutlery echoing in the small kitchen. Even the family dog Max seemed aware of something unusual, his ears twitching toward the forest line. Then it appeared again. A subtle movement among the trees caught Lucy's eye first. She froze mid-bite, her fork hovering above her plate. "It's back," she whispered. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear, excitement, and awe. The bear stood near the same spot as before, just outside the porch, looking almost contemplative. Its dark fur blended with the shadows, and for a moment, the family could hardly tell if it was simply observing or waiting. Mrs. Miller instinctively moved toward the window, pulling the curtains just enough to maintain a clear view. "Everyone stay calm," she said. Her voice was firm but low, designed not to alarm anyone. Ben grabbed his notebook, already anticipating the need to document this second visit. "I think it's studying us now," he said. "It's learning our patterns, just like we're learning its." Mr. Miller leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "It's not scared and it's not aggressive. It seems deliberate. Like it's teaching us something or at least expecting something from us." The bear remained motionless for several minutes, its black eyes scanning the porch, the cabin, even the clearing beyond. The family's curiosity battled with caution. Lucy wanted to step outside to offer food or reassurance, but instinct told her to stay put. Then slowly the bear shifted. It moved closer, stopping just beyond the porch steps, maintaining a careful distance. Its ears flicked, nostrils flared, and for the first time, it let out a low, deliberate grunt, a sound that was more communicative than threatening. "It's trying to communicate," Ben said, whispering, leaning close to the glass. "It wants something, or it wants us to do something." Mrs. Miller shook her head slightly. "Or maybe it's showing us how it wants us to behave." She glanced at Mr. Miller. "The way it watches, it's patient. It's teaching us patience, respect, and boundaries again." Lucy, unable to contain her curiosity, tapped lightly on the window. The bear froze, its gaze snapping toward her. Its eyes held a calm intelligence that made her stop immediately. Slowly she withdrew her hand, a shiver running down her spine. It wasn't anger in the bear's eyes, it was awareness, recognition, almost expectation. For over an hour, the bear lingered. It circled the porch lightly, sniffing the air but never touching the wood or anything on it. Every so often, it would glance back toward the tree line, ensuring the family's movements were visible as if gauging their reactions. During this time the Millers observed, whispered, and debated. Should they leave food outside? Should they attempt to interact or simply continue with their routines? Every suggestion was measured against the bear's calm demeanor. Finally the bear turned, moving slowly toward the forest edge. But unlike the first visit, it paused halfway and looked directly at the cabin. That long, steady gaze lingered for a moment, imprinting itself in the family's minds, before it melted into the shadows. "I think it wants to see if we've learned anything," Mr. Miller said quietly. "The first visit was a test. This one, it's observing how we respond." Lucy couldn't help asking, "Learned what?" "That we're not supposed to be afraid." "It's more than that," Mrs. Miller said. "It's teaching us to be aware of our actions, to respect its space, and to see the forest as more than a backdrop for our lives. We're visitors here, just like it is a visitor in ours." Ben's hand moved rapidly over his notebook. He sketched the bear, its posture, the precise way it lingered. "It's almost symbolic," he murmured. "Like a silent teacher." The day continued with a subtle tension. Every noise in the forest felt amplified, the rustle of leaves, a snapping twig, birds taking flight. Max, the dog, barked at shadows and then quieted, his energy mirroring the family's cautious fascination. By evening the bear did not return. But the lesson lingered. They realized that this repeated visit was not an intrusion. It was an invitation to observe, to reflect, and to adjust their behavior. The forest, they now understood, was a space of mutual respect, not ownership. Dinner was a quiet affair, punctuated by contemplative glances out the window. The children, normally full of chatter, found themselves discussing silently the way the bear had behaved. "It's like it knows who we are," Lucy whispered. "Like it can see us, really see us." Mr. Miller nodded. "Yes, and it's showing us who we need to be, aware, patient, respectful. That's the kind of connection that doesn't require words." Night fell, and the forest exhaled in the cool darkness. The cabin lights glowed softly, a warm contrast to the shadows that stretched across the clearing. Somewhere among the trees, the bear waited, silent and watchful, as if ensuring that the lessons of the day had been absorbed. The family went to bed that night with a quiet understanding. This encounter was far from over. They didn't know when the bear would appear again, but they sensed that each visit would reveal a new layer of insight, an ongoing lesson in coexistence, patience, and respect. Outside, the bear moved back into the forest, its eyes catching the moonlight for a brief moment before disappearing completely. Yet its presence lingered in the cabin, in the thoughts of the Millers, and in the careful awareness that now colored their every movement. The following morning dawned crisp and clear. Sunlight filtered through the tall pines, creating dappled patterns across the cabin's roof and the damp forest floor. The Millers moved with a quiet deliberation, as though unconsciously adopting the awareness they had begun learning from their silent visitor. Breakfast was calm, no rushing, no distraction, and even Max padded softly around the table, as if sensing the delicate equilibrium the family now shared with the surrounding wilderness. It wasn't long before the bear returned. This time, it didn't appear at the porch immediately. Instead, it lingered near the tree line, watching the cabin, observing the family from a distance. Its posture was relaxed yet alert, suggesting familiarity and caution in equal measure. Lucy was the first to notice. "It's there again," she whispered, her eyes wide with anticipation. She held the window frame lightly, careful not to disturb the moment. Ben, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his notebook, paused mid-sketch. "It's watching us," he said softly. "I think it wants to see if we're acting differently than yesterday." Mrs. Miller placed her hand over Lucy's shoulder. "We are," she said. "We're more aware, more patient. That's exactly what it's teaching." The bear slowly advanced from the shadows, stepping over fallen branches and soft moss. Its movements were deliberate, measured, almost ceremonial. It paused near the edge of the porch, sniffing the air without approaching the cabin. Every muscle in its body seemed attuned to the environment, a living example of focus and observation. Mr. Miller watched intently. "It's showing us how to move through life without disturbing the balance around us," he murmured. "Every step, every breath, it's mindful. That's something we could all learn from." Lucy's curiosity nudged her forward, but she caught herself. Instead of rushing to the window or making noise, she simply watched. The bear's eyes met hers for a brief moment, and she felt something profound, an understanding that went beyond fear or fascination. It was recognition, the kind that bridges two very different species through mutual observation. Over the next hour, the family followed a silent routine. They carried on with chores, prepared lunch, and even stepped outside briefly to water the small vegetable patch by the porch, all while maintaining an unspoken truce of observation and respect. The bear never advanced closer than the previous day, yet its presence was constant, a quiet reminder of boundaries and coexistence. Ben sketched furiously, capturing every detail: the angle of the bear's head, the twitch of its ears, the rhythm of its breathing. "It's almost like it's giving us instructions," he whispered to Lucy. "Not with words but with presence." Lucy nodded, finally beginning to understand. "It's teaching us to notice things we usually ignore, to slow down." As the day wore on, a subtle tension lingered. The family felt the weight of observation pressing gently against their awareness. Each movement was deliberate, each glance carried a quiet acknowledgement of the bear's silent supervision. Even Max adjusted his behavior, sitting calmly and keeping his gaze toward the forest edge. By late afternoon, the bear shifted slightly, moving along the side of the cabin to inspect the garden. It sniffed at the soil, nudged a small pile of leaves, and then turned back toward the cabin, as if ensuring that the family remained aware of its proximity without feeling threatened. Mrs. Miller whispered to Mr. Miller, "It's incredible how it teaches without a single action that could be considered threatening. Its presence alone conveys the lesson." "Exactly," he replied. "It's a living reminder that awareness doesn't need words and respect doesn't need force. Observing, noticing, and responding appropriately, that's the lesson." As evening approached, the bear began to retreat toward the forest, but not entirely. It paused on a small ridge, overlooking the cabin and the clearing. Its silhouette was striking against the amber sky, and the family watched, transfixed. The moment was peaceful, almost sacred, yet charged with an undercurrent of anticipation. Lucy finally broke the silence. "Do you think it's happy with us?" she asked softly. Mrs. Miller smiled gently. "It's not about happiness. It's about learning and respect. And I think, yes, it recognizes that we are learning." Ben nodded. "And we'll keep learning, every time it comes back." The forest grew quiet as night approached, but the memory of the bear lingered. Its visits were no longer just an unusual event, they had become lessons etched into the family's daily rhythm. Each day of observation reinforced patience, attentiveness, and an understanding of the balance between humans and nature. The children went to bed that night feeling a new sense of calm. The forest outside seemed less threatening and more alive, a teacher in its own right. The bear, somewhere in the darkness, continued its watch, ensuring that the family's awareness was maintained. Just before falling asleep, Lucy whispered into the darkness of her room, "I wonder what it will show us next." Her words hung in the air, unanswered, yet charged with anticipation. The bear's silent guidance was far from over, and tomorrow promised another opportunity to learn, to observe, and to respect. The next morning brought a stillness that felt almost deliberate, as if the forest itself had paused in anticipation. The Millers moved through their usual routine, but each step, each action was now tinged with an awareness they hadn't possessed before. Breakfast was quiet. The clatter of cutlery and plates seemed louder than usual in the empty cabin. Even Max, normally energetic at the first sign of morning, sat patiently by the porch window, ears perked toward the edge of the forest. It was Lucy who noticed the movement first. A shadow flitted among the pines, smaller than the adult bears she had seen before in books and documentaries. Her breath caught. "Mom? Dad, it's closer," she whispered, pointing toward the edge of the clearing. The bear was indeed closer. Not on the porch, not trespassing inside the yard, but it had moved down from the tree line, lingering near the corner of the cabin. Its presence was deliberate, unthreatening, and yet undeniably powerful. The family felt the weight of observation more intensely than ever. Ben crouched by the window with his notebook. "It's watching everything we do," he said quietly, his eyes flicking between the bear and the pages he had filled with sketches. "Every movement, every decision. It's teaching us more than patience now, it's teaching precision." Mr. Miller leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Or maybe discernment. We have to think about what we do, how we act, even when we think no one is looking. That's the lesson it's giving us, through presence, not noise." The bear remained still for nearly an hour, observing, sniffing, occasionally shifting its weight. Max lay down, letting out a low, contented sigh as if sensing the calm authority in the bear's presence. The children watched intently, internalizing the quiet but profound communication unfolding before them. Mrs. Miller reached over and took Lucy's hand. "Do you see what it's doing?" she asked softly. "It's close enough to test us, but it's never crossing the line. That's the boundary. We must respect it just as it respects ours." Lucy nodded. The lesson was sinking in. "So, it's telling us we have to be careful even when it's not dangerous?" "Exactly," her mother replied. "It's teaching us responsibility and awareness. It's showing us that respect is reciprocal and boundaries matter, both theirs and ours." As the sun climbed higher, the bear began to move again, not aggressively but with a deliberate curiosity. It wandered to the side of the porch where a small stack of firewood rested. The bear sniffed at the wood, gently nudging a piece with its snout, then stepped back, seemingly satisfied that nothing was being disturbed. Ben jotted down every detail. "It's careful. So careful. It's teaching us to observe, to consider consequences before acting." Lucy, captivated, leaned closer to the glass. "Do you think it understands that we're watching it too?" Mrs. Miller smiled. "I think so. There's a mutual understanding forming here. Not words but recognition. It's a dialogue without sound." For the rest of the day, the bear lingered near the cabin but never approached further. It observed the family's routines, fetching water, tending to the garden, sweeping the porch. The Millers moved with a mindfulness that had not existed before, aware of every step and gesture. The presence of the bear had transformed ordinary tasks into lessons of attentiveness and care. Late afternoon brought a moment of tension. A sudden noise, a snapping branch, caused Lucy to startle and Max barked sharply. The bear's ears twitched and it immediately froze, scanning the clearing. But instead of retreating, it remained, evaluating the situation, teaching the family a subtle yet important lesson: caution without panic. Mr. Miller whispered, "Notice that? It's aware of the disruption but it doesn't react impulsively. That's control. That's understanding the environment before acting." Lucy nodded slowly, her eyes wide. So even if something scares us, we don't have to panic? Exactly, Mrs. Miller said. Observation first, reaction second. Awareness before action. As evening approached, the bear retreated toward the forest once more, pausing at the edge of the clearing to glance back at the cabin. The family felt a subtle sense of connection, a silent acknowledgement that the day's lessons had been noticed, understood, and absorbed. But the tranquility was not permanent. That night, as darkness settled over the cabin, the sound of rustling leaves reached the Millers' ears. A faint silhouette appeared at the edge of the clearing, larger this time and unmistakably deliberate. The bear had returned, and it was not alone. Two smaller forms, cubs perhaps, trailed behind. The family froze, their minds racing. The bear's solitary visits had already transformed their understanding of respect, boundaries, and observation. Now, with the appearance of the cubs, the lesson had deepened. Life in the forest was about family, protection, and responsibility, and the Millers were now directly witnessing it. Lucy whispered, They're bringing the cubs? Yes, Mr. Miller said quietly, awestruck. And this changes everything. Now it's not just observation, it's demonstration. They're showing us how care and guidance work in nature. The cubs tumbled lightly over the mossy ground, their movements playful yet cautious. The adult bear watched over them, ensuring they stayed within view of the clearing but never crossing into human space. Every step, every glance, every pause was deliberate, a silent teaching of boundaries, protection, and responsibility. For a long moment, the Millers stood in awe, realizing that their cabin had become a classroom without walls, their teachers silent, patient, and entirely real. The dawn was crisp, the air carrying the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. The Millers awoke to a sense of anticipation, their dreams still echoing the previous evening's quiet revelation. For the first time, the forest no longer felt threatening. It felt alive, purposeful, and deeply observant. Max, their dog, padded to the window and barked softly, his voice almost celebratory rather than alarmed. Through the haze of morning mist, Lucy was the first to spot the bear family. The adults stood near the porch as before, calm and watchful, while the two cubs tumbled playfully around the clearing. Their movements were uncoordinated but careful, as if they were learning boundaries under the supervision of the adult bear. Lucy pressed her forehead against the glass, eyes wide. They're so small and careful. Just like the adult said yesterday, the adult is teaching them. Mrs. Miller nodded, kneeling beside her daughter. Yes. And now we're observing a bigger lesson: family, protection, and responsibility. Notice how each movement of the adult is deliberate, ensuring the cubs remain safe without interfering with us. Ben, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his notebook, sketched furiously. It's incredible, he whispered. The cubs are learning boundaries through observation just like we are. Every step is a lesson in respect and caution. The adult bear shifted its gaze toward the cabin, watching the family as much as the cubs. Its presence conveyed calm authority, a silent command that every being within this clearing, human or bear, was expected to act with awareness. Mr. Miller stood near the doorway, arms folded, absorbing the scene. It's teaching responsibility, he said slowly. Not just for the cubs but for us. Every action has consequences. Every decision matters. Lucy whispered almost to herself, it's like, it trusts us to understand without words. Exactly, her mother replied. Trust is earned through respect, observation, and careful action. That's the lesson. For the rest of the morning, the Millers moved deliberately through their routines, maintaining the balance of awareness the bear seemed to require. Watering the garden, sweeping the porch, even walking Max along the edge of the clearing was performed with conscious care. The cubs, playful but cautious, mimicked the adults' movements, pausing when the family moved, stepping lightly, sniffing the ground without disturbing it. At one point, the smaller cub approached a small pile of leaves near the porch. The adult bear immediately turned, nudged it gently away and guided it back toward the safe path through the clearing. The Millers watched, entranced, understanding the nuanced communication. Guidance without force, lessons without coercion. Ben whispered to Lucy, do you see how the adult doesn't shout or attack? He just shows the right way. That's how we should treat people too, teach without force. Lucy nodded slowly. I get it now, patience, awareness, guiding gently. Mrs. Miller smiled softly. Yes, and noticing consequences. Every action matters whether you're human or animal. That's why it's teaching us this way. The afternoon sun rose higher, casting sharp shadows across the clearing. The adult bear and cubs continued their subtle dance of learning and teaching, while the family moved with careful deliberation. Even Max seemed attuned to the rhythm, pacing quietly, ears alert yet calm. Suddenly, a loud rustle in the far corner of the forest startled Lucy. One of the cubs froze, glancing nervously toward the tree line. The adult bear immediately shifted, moving to position itself between the cubs and the potential threat. Its body language was deliberate, protective but non-aggressive. Mr. Miller whispered, "That's protection. Not fear. Not attack. Awareness, positioning, guidance. Look at how it ensures the cubs are safe without escalating the situation." The rustle turned out to be nothing, a small deer leaping through the underbrush, but the lesson lingered. The adult bear had demonstrated the principle of vigilance, control, and measured response. The family absorbed it, understanding the broader implications. Life often requires careful observation and subtle intervention rather than reactionary aggression. By late afternoon, the cubs had grown more confident, exploring the edges of the clearing while remaining within the safety of the adult's watch. The Millers continued their chores, now moving in harmony with the rhythm of the forest rather than imposing their own. There was a quiet satisfaction in the balance they had achieved, an unspoken acknowledgement that coexistence demanded mindfulness, respect, and patience. Lucy finally broke the quiet. "Do you think they'll stay nearby every day?" Mrs. Miller shook her head softly. "I think they'll come when they feel the need. And each time they'll teach us something new. Life is full of lessons, sometimes delivered in silence." As evening approached, the bear family began to retreat, the adult leading the cubs back toward the tree line. Yet before disappearing completely, the adult paused, casting one long, steady gaze at the cabin. In that look, the Millers felt a weight of understanding, as if the adult bear had silently acknowledged their efforts, their patience, and their respect. The family stood together at the window, hearts pounding with awe. The cubs tumbled behind the adult one last time, then vanished into the shadows of the forest. Silence settled over the clearing, but the lesson lingered, intense, tangible, and transformative. Mr. Miller finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "We've learned something today we could never have imagined. Not just patience, not just awareness, but responsibility, for ourselves, for the world around us, and for every living creature we share it with." Lucy nodded slowly. "And trust without words." Ben closed his notebook, a rare expression of satisfaction on his face. I think we're ready for whatever comes next. Whatever lesson they want to teach." The night descended, casting the cabin in a soft glow against the dark forest. Max curled up at the foot of the stairs, the children whispered quietly about the day's observations, and the Millers felt a profound sense of connection, not only with the bear family but with the living world surrounding them. Yet somewhere in the shadows the adult bear lingered, patient, watchful, silent, but unmistakably planning its next lesson. The story was far from over. The family knew that every encounter would reveal another layer of insight, another subtle instruction on coexistence, patience, and respect. The next morning arrived cool and misty, with the scent of pine and wet earth seeping into every corner of the cabin. The Millers had developed a quiet rhythm, a subtle synchronization with the forest, anticipating the movements of their silent teacher. Even the children moved with restraint and care, aware that today, like every day the bear visited, observation would be the key to understanding. Lucy was the first to notice movement in the clearing. "They're here," she whispered, pointing toward the tree line. The adult bear stood at the edge, flanked by its cubs, each taking tentative steps forward. This time, however, the bear lingered differently. It remained slightly closer to the cabin, just far enough to maintain a safe distance, but near enough for the family to feel its weighty presence. Ben grabbed his notebook immediately, flipping to a fresh page. "It's testing us again," he murmured. "The proximity, it wants to see how we react under observation." Mrs. Miller nodded, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "It's a subtle lesson in composure. We've learned patience and awareness, now it's teaching restraint under pressure." The family continued their morning routines. They fetched water from the small barrel outside, swept the porch, and checked the garden. Every movement was careful, deliberate, as if they were aware of the bear's watchful eyes in a way that transcended fear. The cubs watched the human actions curiously, mirroring their own small movements, learning from both the adult bear and the humans. Mr. Miller leaned against the doorframe, observing silently. "Notice how the adult positions itself," he whispered. "It's not just protection, it's teaching spatial awareness. The cubs learn by watching its distance and timing, just as we're learning to respect its distance." Lucy's eyes followed the cubs as they explored the clearing. One tripped over a mossy log, stumbling forward, and the adult bear immediately adjusted its stance, stepping closer and guiding the cub with a gentle nudge. Lucy gasped softly. It's like, it's showing care without touching too much, just enough to guide. Exactly, Ben said quietly. It's teaching balance, when to intervene and when to let the learner discover on their own. The family moved slowly, aware that their own actions were also part of the lesson. Even small tasks, sweeping leaves, moving firewood, were performed with conscious care. The bear's watchful presence transformed ordinary chores into exercises in mindfulness, patience, and mutual respect. Mid-morning brought an unexpected challenge. A sudden gust of wind shook the trees, sending a cascade of pine needles and branches into the clearing. The cubs froze, glancing toward the adult. Max barked sharply, startled by the sudden noise. The adult bear remained calm, its body language steady and composed. It moved deliberately between the cubs and the clearing, guiding them back to safety without panicking or reacting aggressively. Mrs. Miller whispered to the children, "Observe closely. The adult's calmness teaches the cubs to remain composed. Panic isn't instinctive, it's learned. And so is composure." Lucy's eyes widened. "So it's teaching us composure too?" "Yes," her mother replied softly. "Even in sudden chaos, awareness and patience allow us to act responsibly without harm." The bear's lesson continued as the family went about their midday tasks. The cubs began to mimic the adult's careful movements, exploring the edges of the clearing, sniffing the ground and testing boundaries. Every small step was intentional, every glance calculated. The Millers watched, absorbing the depth of the lesson unfolding before them. Ben jotted furiously in his notebook. "It's teaching observation, awareness, patience, restraint, everything we need to understand about responsibility." As afternoon approached, the adult bear shifted, moving closer to the cabin porch. The family froze, holding their positions, aware that even the smallest movement could alter the dynamics of this silent exchange. The bear stopped, sniffed the air, and glanced at the family, holding its gaze for several long moments. Mr. Miller exhaled quietly. "It's acknowledging us now," he said. "We're not just observers, we're participants in the lesson. Our awareness, our restraint, is being measured." Lucy whispered, "I think it's proud of us, in its own way." Mrs. Miller smiled. "Perhaps. But more importantly, it's teaching us that respect and awareness are reciprocal. Every action, every observation counts." The bear and cubs eventually retreated back into the forest, pausing at the tree line for a final glance. The family remained by the window, hearts pounding with the intensity of the unspoken dialogue they had just experienced. Silence settled over the clearing, heavy with meaning. The Millers gathered in the living room, reflecting on the lessons of the day. "We've seen patience, respect, and composure," Mr. Miller said. "Now we've seen guidance, subtle intervention, and the importance of timing." Lucy nodded slowly. It's teaching us about life. How to move through it carefully, thoughtfully, and with respect for others." Ben closed his notebook, satisfied. "And every day it shows us something new. I can't wait to see what comes next." As night fell, the forest around the cabin grew quiet. The bear's presence lingered in the Millers' minds, a constant reminder of the depth of the lessons being shared. Somewhere among the shadows, the adult bear waited, patient and watchful, ensuring that each encounter would continue to shape the family's awareness and understanding. The morning sun filtered through the canopy in thin golden shafts, illuminating the forest floor with a serene, almost ethereal glow. The Millers awoke to a calmness that felt different from previous days. A subtle expectation hung in the air, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Breakfast was quiet, each clink of cutlery echoing softly in the cabin, and even Max padded carefully by the window, his ears twitching toward the clearing. Lucy was the first to notice movement among the trees. The adult bear appeared again, flanked by its cubs, but this time, it remained completely still, almost statuesque at the edge of the clearing. Its eyes were fixed on the cabin, evaluating, waiting, measuring. The cubs, smaller and more playful than the day before, mirrored the adult's stillness, pausing mid-step as if sensing the importance of the moment. Ben leaned forward, gripping his notebook. "It's testing us again. The stillness, it's teaching patience. We can't rush this." Mrs. Miller nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's more than patience, it's attentiveness. Waiting without interference. Watching without judgment. That's what today is about." The Millers moved deliberately, performing their morning tasks with quiet precision. Watering the garden, sweeping the porch, and even feeding Max became exercises in careful awareness. Each step, each glance, was measured, conscious, as if they were part of a living experiment in patience and observation. The bear remained at the edge of the clearing for over an hour, its gaze unwavering. The cubs occasionally moved closer to the cabin, sniffing the air, but the adult's watchful presence ensured they did not cross boundaries. Lucy's fascination grew. "They're so still, yet so aware," she whispered. "It's like they're teaching us to do the same." "Exactly," Mrs. Miller replied softly. "Patience isn't about waiting idly, it's about observing, learning, and acting only when the time is right. That's what the bear is showing us." At mid-morning, a sudden rustle in the underbrush startled the family. A small deer leapt across the clearing and Max barked sharply. The cubs froze, and the adult bear immediately adjusted its stance, positioning itself between the cubs and the disturbance without aggression. Its body language conveyed calm control, teaching both cubs and humans the importance of measured response. Mr. Miller leaned against the doorframe, eyes fixed on the bear. "Notice how it reacts, not with panic, not with force, but with awareness. That's patience in action. That's composure under observation." Lucy nodded slowly. "So even when something unexpected happens, we can respond without fear if we stay aware." Ben scribbled furiously in his notebook. "It's subtle, but it's teaching timing. When to act, when to wait, when to observe." As the day progressed, the family continued their routines with deliberate care. Even simple tasks like tending the small vegetable garden became exercises in mindfulness. The bear's presence transformed ordinary actions into lessons of discipline, attentiveness, and patience. The cubs played quietly, testing boundaries, learning from the adult, and subtly teaching the Millers to mirror their careful observation. At one point, the adult bear shifted slightly closer to the porch. The family froze, understanding the gravity of the moment. The bear's stillness was no longer just observation. It was an invitation to demonstrate their understanding of patience. Every subtle movement of the Millers was being measured, noted in a silent dialogue that transcended words. Mrs. Miller whispered to Lucy, "Patience isn't passive. It's active awareness. Every glance, every step matters. The bear is showing us this in real time." Lucy watched, mesmerized as the cubs mirrored their parents' calm composure. One small cub stumbled over a log, paused, and looked back at the adult, who guided it with a subtle nudge. Lucy's eyes widened in understanding. It's not rushing the cub, it's letting it learn naturally. That's what we have to do too. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the clearing. The adult bear and cubs finally began to retreat, moving toward the forest edge. But before disappearing completely, the adult paused and looked back at the cabin. Its gaze was steady, expectant, and filled with a quiet intensity that left the Millers feeling both awed and challenged. Mr. Miller exhaled slowly. "It's testing us one last time today. Have we truly learned patience and composure, or do we still act impulsively?" Lucy whispered, I think we're learning." Ben closed his notebook with a satisfied sigh. Every day another lesson. And each one builds on the last. As night fell, the family gathered in the living room reflecting on the day. "Today was about more than observation," Mrs. Miller said. "It was about discipline, mindfulness, and understanding the timing of our actions. The forest has become our classroom and our teacher, silent, patient, and wise." Max curled up at the foot of the stairs, and the children whispered quietly about the lessons they had witnessed. Outside, the forest seemed almost alive, every rustle, every shadow carrying the weight of potential instruction. Somewhere in the trees, the adult bear lingered with the cubs, patiently waiting for the next day's lessons to unfold. The Millers knew with a deep certainty that their encounters were far from over. Each visit, each observation, each subtle action of the bear and its cubs carried meaning, lessons about patience, responsibility, awareness, and respect that could not be taught in a classroom or learned from a book. Lucy, finally settling under her blanket, whispered softly, "I wonder what lesson tomorrow will bring." Her words hung in the air, unanswered, yet charged with anticipation. The silent teacher in the forest had more to reveal, and the Millers were ready, hearts open, minds alert, and spirits attuned to the quiet guidance of the bear family. The morning air was sharp and clear, carrying the rich scent of pine, damp soil, and the faint aroma of wood smoke from the cabin stove. The Millers awoke with an unspoken anticipation. Over the past week, the forest had become a living classroom, and the bear family their patient instructors. Today, something in the stillness suggested a new lesson, a deeper layer of understanding waiting to unfold. Lucy was the first to notice movement at the edge of the clearing. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The adult bear and its two cubs emerged from the shadows, calm, deliberate, and unhurried. But today the adult moved closer than ever, pausing halfway across the clearing, eyes fixed on the cabin. The cubs mirrored the adult's calm, their small steps precise, almost ceremonial. Ben, notebook in hand, whispered, "It's different today, closer. I think it's testing trust." Mrs. Miller nodded quietly. "Yes. Patience and composure have been taught. Now it's about mutual trust, between the bears and us." The family carried out their morning routine with careful attention. Watering the garden, sweeping the porch, and feeding Max became exercises in intentionality. Every movement mattered. The bears' proximity magnified the importance of their actions, teaching that trust is built through consistent respect and mindfulness. Mr. Miller observed silently. "Notice how it watches not just the cubs but us too. Trust is reciprocal. We show respect and it shows confidence in our restraint. It's giving us room while measuring our awareness." Lucy's gaze followed a cub as it tentatively approached a patch of wildflowers near the porch. The adult bear's eyes tracked the movement, and it remained still, allowing the cub to explore while providing invisible guidance. Lucy whispered, "It trusts the cub, and us too." Ben scribbled in his notebook, capturing every subtle movement. "We're learning about trust, not control. Observation, guidance, patience, and now faith in each other's understanding." The day unfolded with subtle exercises in observation and restraint. The cubs explored more confidently, sometimes venturing closer to the cabin but never crossing the boundaries set by the adult. The Millers mirrored the bear's calm, moving slowly, consciously, aware that each step was an act of trust building. At mid-morning, a sudden noise, a snapping branch, caused Max to bark sharply. The cubs froze, and the adult bear immediately positioned itself between the clearing and the disturbance. Its posture was protective but not aggressive. The family watched, internalizing the lesson: trust does not negate vigilance. Safety and faith coexist, requiring awareness and careful judgment. Mrs. Miller whispered, "See that? Trust doesn't mean recklessness. It means understanding boundaries and responsibilities." Lucy's eyes widened. "So we can trust but we also stay aware?" "Exactly," her mother replied softly. "Trust requires observation, patience, and respect." The afternoon brought another subtle test. The adult bear moved closer to the porch while the cubs explored nearby. The family remained still, breathing slowly, aware that even small movements could influence the bear's perception of their reliability. The adult paused, locking eyes with Mr. Miller for several long moments. The silent communication was profound, a test of calm, consistency, and attentiveness. Mr. Miller exhaled slowly. "It's asking us, do we deserve trust? Will we respect its presence without taking liberties?" Lucy whispered, "I think we do. We've learned to be patient, aware, and careful." The cubs tumbled playfully near the edge of the clearing, occasionally glancing back at the adult, whose presence conveyed both authority and reassurance. The Millers observed quietly, understanding the complex interplay. The adult trusted them to act responsibly, while the cubs learned trust through observation. The family's awareness became part of the lesson, integrated seamlessly into the daily rhythm of coexistence. By late afternoon, the adult bear signaled the cubs to retreat toward the tree line. They moved slowly, deliberately, pausing to glance at the cabin before disappearing into the shadows. The adult lingered at the clearing's edge for a final long gaze, eyes heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. Mrs. Miller whispered, "Trust is built slowly. It's earned through patience, composure, and respect. Today they've shown us that trust can exist across species." Lucy smiled softly. "I feel like we're part of their world even for a little while." Ben nodded, closing his notebook. "We've learned patience, observation, composure, and now trust. What's next?" Night descended over the cabin, bringing with it a serene silence. The forest seemed alive yet calm, every rustle of leaves a gentle reminder of lessons learned. Max lay curled at the foot of the stairs, the children whispered softly about the day, and the Millers reflected on the invisible but powerful bonds forming between humans and bears. Somewhere beyond the shadows, the adult bear lingered with its cubs, watching, waiting, and preparing the next set of lessons. The family knew that each day brought deeper understanding, and that coexistence with patience, respect, and trust was a skill both humans and animals shared and nurtured together. How do you build trust in your own life, with family, friends, or even yourself? If a wild animal were silently teaching trust and respect, what lessons would you take away? The morning broke with a pale golden light that filtered softly through the dense forest canopy. The Millers awoke with a quiet sense of expectation, hearts already tuned to the rhythm of the cabin and the forest beyond. Over the past several days, each morning had brought lessons in patience, awareness, composure, and trust. Today the forest seemed to hum with a subtler, more profound lesson: respect. Lucy pressed her forehead against the window, peering out into the clearing. "They're here," she whispered. The adult bear and its cubs had emerged, each step deliberate, measured, and full of purpose. The adult positioned itself slightly farther from the cabin than usual, giving the family space, yet maintaining an authoritative presence that immediately drew respect. The cubs mimicked the adult's movements, testing boundaries, learning the silent rules of coexistence. Ben, notebook open, whispered, "Respect. This is about boundaries, isn't it? How we act around them, how we observe without intrusion." Mrs. Miller nodded. "Yes. Patience and trust were lessons in interaction. Respect is the foundation that allows both humans and bears to coexist peacefully." The family went about their morning routines slowly, deliberately. Watering the small vegetable patch, sweeping the porch, tending to firewood, and feeding Max were all executed with mindfulness. Each movement, each glance, was weighed, considered, and measured as if they understood the significance of every action. The bears watched, silent instructors of unspoken principles. The adult bear shifted slightly, its gaze moving between the cubs and the Millers. Its posture conveyed authority without aggression, creating a natural hierarchy of space and interaction. The cubs, small and playful, ventured closer to the cabin, occasionally sniffing at objects or testing the edges of the clearing. The adult bear subtly guided them, nudging them away from unsafe areas and demonstrating boundaries. Mr. Miller leaned against the doorframe, observing quietly. "Notice how respect is both given and earned," he murmured. "The bears give us space and we honor it. The cubs test boundaries and the adult enforces them with calm authority. It's a delicate balance, and today, we see how essential respect is to coexistence." Lucy's eyes followed a cub that cautiously approached the porch, sniffing a flower bed. The adult bear shifted slightly, eyes fixed on the cub, a gentle but firm reminder of limits. Lucy whispered, "So even small actions matter, respecting the space of others is part of the lesson." Mrs. Miller smiled softly. "Exactly. Respect isn't just about humans or animals, it's about understanding the boundaries and needs of every living thing around us." At mid-morning, a sudden gust of wind shook the trees, sending pine needles and leaves tumbling across the clearing. The cubs froze, glancing toward the adult. The adult shifted its stance, positioning itself between the cubs and the disturbance without aggression. Max barked sharply and the family instinctively froze. The adult bear's response was measured and controlled, teaching the cubs, and the family, the importance of respect in the face of potential chaos. Mr. Miller whispered, "Notice that? Respect doesn't mean ignoring danger. It's about measured, appropriate response. Observing, protecting, but not overreacting." Lucy's eyes widened. "So it's about awareness too, knowing how to act and when." "Yes," Mrs. Miller replied. "It's a lesson in careful judgment, combined with patience, composure, and trust." The afternoon sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the clearing. The adult bear and cubs explored the space carefully, testing boundaries while maintaining a respectful distance from the cabin. The Millers mirrored this respect, moving deliberately, aware of every small movement, every sound. Even the smallest gestures, a sweeping motion, a step across the porch, a glance out the window, were executed with mindfulness, honoring the silent dialogue occurring between species. At one point, a cub strayed too close to the edge of the porch. The adult bear nudged it gently, a subtle but firm reminder of limits. Lucy whispered, "It's teaching discipline, through respect, not fear." Ben scribbled in his notebook, capturing every detail. "It's incredible, patience, composure, trust, and now respect. Each lesson builds on the last, culminating in understanding how to coexist responsibly." Late afternoon brought a test. A small deer emerged from the forest edge, moving toward the clearing. The adult bear immediately positioned itself between the cubs and the intruder, standing tall and alert. The cubs froze, learning vigilance and awareness. The Millers held their breath, understanding that every being in the clearing was observing and learning simultaneously. Mrs. Miller whispered, "Even in unexpected situations, respect governs behavior. The adult bear enforces boundaries without aggression, teaching the cubs, and us, the value of measured action." Lucy nodded slowly. "So respect, it's about balance. Not just following rules but understanding how actions affect others." As evening approached, the adult bear signaled the cubs to retreat toward the forest. They moved slowly, pausing to glance at the cabin before disappearing into the shadows. The adult lingered for a final gaze, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. Mr. Miller exhaled quietly. Today respect became tangible. We've observed it, mirrored it, and understood its importance. But the forest still has more to teach us. Lucy whispered, I feel like we're learning something bigger, something about life itself. Ben closed his notebook, eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Every day a new layer. Every encounter, a new understanding. What's next, I wonder? Night fell and the cabin settled into a tranquil hush. Max lay at the foot of the stairs, the children whispered softly about the lessons, and the Millers reflected on the invisible yet profound bonds forming between humans and the bear family. The forest seemed alive with meaning, every rustle and shadow carrying silent instruction. Somewhere in the trees, the adult bear waited with its cubs, patient and watchful, ready to guide the family through the next stage of understanding. The Millers knew that respect, like trust, patience, and awareness, was a continuous practice, a living principle that would deepen with each encounter. The morning sun rose gently over the cabin, casting soft amber light across the forest clearing. The Millers awoke with a sense of anticipation and quiet excitement, aware that this day would bring a culmination of all the lessons they had learned. The air felt charged, not with tension but with awareness, calm, and respect. Lucy pressed her forehead to the window, peering out. The adult bear and its cubs were already visible, emerging gracefully from the forest shadows. The adult stood mid-clearing, calm, deliberate, its gaze scanning both the cubs and the cabin. The cubs tumbled playfully, yet with care, occasionally glancing at the adult for guidance. Ben, notebook in hand, whispered, Today feels different. It's as if all the lessons are coming together, patience, trust, composure, respect. Now it's about integration. Mrs. Miller nodded quietly. Yes. Today we apply what we've learned, not just observe. Every action, every thought, every glance is part of a living lesson in coexistence. The family went about their morning routines with deliberate mindfulness. Watering the garden, sweeping the porch, tending to the firewood, and feeding Max were all performed with calm, intentional actions. The adult bear watched quietly, acknowledging their careful integration of lessons. The cubs observed the human actions with curiosity, mirroring the calm, deliberate behavior they had learned from their parent. Mr. Miller leaned against the doorframe, eyes scanning the clearing. Notice how seamlessly observation and action are merging. The family moves naturally, aware of the bears, while the bears move naturally, aware of the family. Trust, respect, patience, they're all intertwined now. Lucy smiled softly. I feel connected. Not just to the bears but to the forest itself. Like everything is part of the same rhythm. Ben scribbled in his notebook. It's more than learning lessons, it's living them. By late morning, the adult bear moved closer to the cabin, yet maintained a respectful distance. The cubs explored nearby, sniffing at objects, testing the edges of the clearing, yet never overstepping. Max padded quietly, attentive but calm. The Millers observed, understanding that this final lesson was about harmony, the seamless coexistence of all elements in a shared environment. Mrs. Miller whispered, Integration means balance. Awareness without tension, trust without fear, patience without passivity, respect without rigidity. Today the forest is teaching us harmony. At midday a small disturbance occurred. A deer approached the clearing, curious and cautious. The adult bear immediately adjusted its stance, positioning itself between the cubs and the visitor, while remaining calm and measured. The cubs paused, learning vigilance. The Millers watched, internalizing the lesson. Harmony requires vigilance and care, even in moments of apparent calm. Mr. Miller said softly, Integration isn't about ignoring challenges. It's about approaching them thoughtfully with awareness, respect, and composure. Lucy nodded slowly. So everything we've learned comes together when life challenges us. As afternoon approached, the bear family began to retreat toward the forest edge. The adult paused for one final long gaze at the cabin, its eyes conveying acknowledgement, understanding, and quiet pride. The cubs followed, glancing back occasionally. Max remained alert but calm, sensing the conclusion of this silent dialogue. The Millers stood by the window, hearts full of gratitude and awe. They had witnessed lessons that transcended fear, curiosity, or simple observation. They had absorbed patience, trust, composure, and respect, and now they had integrated them into their own understanding of life and coexistence. Lucy whispered, I understand now. It's about more than bears or cabins. It's about living thoughtfully, being aware of how our actions affect everything around us. Ben closed his notebook with a sense of finality. Every day a lesson. Every encounter a chance to learn. And today, we've learned to live them. As night fell, the forest settled into a serene, almost sacred hush. The cabin glowed softly from within, a small beacon of human presence harmonized with the rhythm of the natural world. Max curled up at the foot of the stairs, the children whispered softly, and the Millers reflected on the invisible but transformative bonds they had formed with the bear family. Yet beyond the shadows, the adult bear lingered with its cubs, patient and watchful, a reminder that learning and growth are ongoing. The Millers knew that the lessons would continue, through observation, action, and reflection, and that coexistence with awareness, trust, patience, and respect was a lifelong journey. Mrs. Miller finally spoke, her voice calm and steady. The forest has been our teacher. The bears our guides. And now, we live the lessons they've taught. Lucy whispered, "Do you think they'll come back?" Mr. Miller smiled softly. "I believe they will when the time is right. And each time they'll show us something new. That's the beauty of learning from nature. It's endless." Ben looked out the window one last time before closing it, notebook tucked under his arm. And maybe the most important lesson is to remain open, aware, and humble. To continue learning no matter how much we think we know. The forest around the cabin grew still, every leaf, branch, and rustle holding a quiet significance. Somewhere in the shadows, the adult bear and cubs paused, their gaze lingering before retreating into the safety of the trees. The clearing, now empty of wildlife, remained alive in the hearts and minds of the Millers, who understood that life itself could be a classroom when observed with respect and awareness. How do you integrate lessons from nature, animals, or life experiences into your daily actions? What have you learned about patience, trust, respect, and harmony in your own life?